it just can be at times, which is good at times. But she's also, my daughter, I think, very has learned a lot about differences in people, that we're not all the same, that we all have different strengths or areas that we can support each other. And so I think in that regard, it's been very important and beneficial for her to have that understanding at such an early age.
I know you became a mom quite a while ago, but I people must ask you this question all the time. Um, as a manual wheelchair user, I know people ask me similar questions, and so I never know what to respond. But I'm gonna ask it regardless, just because I don't have the experience of being being blind or visually impaired. So how do you think being blind or visually impaired, or whatever the correct version of saying that is, I know you can see, I know you're sensitive to light and you can see larger objects. How has uh, that identity of yours shaped your role of being a mom, either for better or in ways that are more filled with obstacles?
That is a really, really good question. And you're the first person to ask me that question in relation to how, like, my impairment impacts being a mom. So I just thank you for asking. So my daughter now is 15. And I can remember, when she was really little, as you know, most kids don't really have the ability, they haven't developed enough to see things from another person's perspective. So I do remember the period of time between between age 5, 6, 7, 8, to where I was trying to explain to her that I saw things differently, or try to explain about my vision impairment, or she was learning how to read and I couldn't see the print in her books, for example. So I had, that was a concept of her, like, she couldn't understand why I couldn't see that. And then I think as she matured and got older, she became more clear, she like understanding that I don't see the same as she does. So, so it was a process, and it was really a kind of a fascinating, I think, learning experience for both of us. And today, as a 15-year-old, sometimes I think, my vision impairment can often be a sense of humor for our family, a source of humor for our family, which it just can be at times, which is good at times. But she's also, my daughter, I think, has learned a lot about differences in people, that we're not all the same, that we all have different strengths or areas that we can support each other. And so I think in that regard, it's been very important and beneficial for her to have that understanding at such an early age.
What do you think everyday people can do to make their digital contents more accessible, to people of all abilities and disabilities? And as we get more immersed into the digital world, and will be even more so moving into the future, more and more people having a bigger presence and identity online. And so how can we nourish those friendships as much as possible through the various, despite the different abilities, disabilities, and what other differences there may be?
Well, there's a lot of different ways to learn about digital accessibility and what that means. And you can go to the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and the WCAG it's a set of guidelines, and within each guideline you have what's known as the success criteria. And these are the very specific, I'll call them standards. It's not always the right language. They're known as criteria, but this is the very specific standards of how to build accessible digital products. So I'll just use a very basic example. Is like, one of the standards is to have predictable and consistent navigation on your website. Well, who doesn't benefit? We all benefit from that. Have you ever been to a website, you can't find, you can't figure out how you landed on a certain page and how to find the page again, or where you are, or how to go back. So just think about, you know, how that is a benefit to everybody, not just people with disabilities, but to have consistent and predictable navigation on your website is an accessibility standard. Another example is how we use color, right? So you can certainly use color, but be thinking about, if you're using color to be the only way to convey meaning in something, like you have to be able to distinguish colors in order to interact with a form or make a choice or make a selection, you're excluding people who may not be able to perceive color, right? Another really important accessibility standard is contrast. So that's just the contrast between the text and the background. And if it's, you know, light gray text on a white background, is extremely difficult for me to access. And make something that's increase your contrast levels, so that way you're able to reach so many more people who are just who have low vision. So there's just 3 examples right there. By going into WCAG which is through the W3C, you can read about each of the standards and start to understand what they are, and start to implement them within your digital content. There's also standards now in the most recent iteration of WCAG 2.1 that are specific to mobile devices. So thinking about how is your website responsive? Does it reflow in a way that retains its meaning and operability when you change the size of the screen that you're viewing it on? So things like that, really, they aren't just benefiting those users who happen to have a disability, but they really make a product more usable for everyone.